That sound still wakes me up in the middle of the night. The dry thud of the door slamming, a metallic echo that seemed to scream, "It's over." My name is Chen. I'm 37 years old, and on that March night in 2023, I was sure I wouldn't see the sunrise. We were 43 brothers gathered in the basement of an old textile factory on the outskirts of Wenzhou, Xi'an province. We had searched for months until we found that place, a forgotten cellar with damp, sweaty walls and dark stains of old grease scattered across the floor. It wasn't pretty, but for us, it was a sacred refuge. There, we could worship without fear of being found, or at least, that's what we thought. When the engines began to roar outside, it was 9:15 p.m. At first, it seemed like a distant sound, almost like a storm approaching the mountain. But storms don't come with the screech of heavy brakes or the rhythmic thud of boots marching in sync. Brother Lou, who led our group, raised his hand, asking for total silence. His face, always so calm, was now tense and pale. We all knew what to do in these moments. Remain still, in complete silence, and pray. The vehicles surrounded the building like a pack of dogs cornering their prey. From the sound of the doors, I managed to count them. 3 military trucks. There must have been about 25, maybe 30 men. The flashlights began to sweep the windows of the upper floor, casting restless shadows that descended to where we were hiding. My 15-year-old daughter, May, squeezed my hand so hard I felt her nails digging into my skin. I didn't say anything. I just squeezed back, trying to project a sense of security that I didn't feel. That's when we heard footsteps descending the iron staircase, slow, calculated, as if they knew exactly where we were and were savoring every second of our desperation. The basement door, which we had reinforced with thick planks and chains, began to tremble. 1 bang, 2 bang. On the third, the wood gave way with a crack that sounded like bones breaking. The light from the lanterns suddenly blinded us. 43 frightened faces, 43 uncertain fates, 43 lives that the government considered too dangerous to exist. The commander was thin, with a deep scar on his face. He didn't need to shout. His voice came out cold, cutting, when he said the words, "I will never forget. There will be no trial. There will be no prison. You will disappear tonight, and tomorrow, no one will remember you were here." Someone sobbed. I think it was Sister Shang, a 72-year-old woman who survived the Cultural Revolution. If even she, who had seen so much, was crying now, it was because this time it was serious. This time, we had no way out. They made us leave in a line. They tied our hands with plastic cable ties so tightly they cut off circulation. The icy night wind, it must have been about 8 degrees, hit my face as we went out. I saw my breath turning into white smoke that quickly disappeared into the air. The stars shone up above, indifferent, as if nothing was happening. And then I saw what awaited us. A giant yellow excavator, its mechanical arm raised like a claw ready to attack. Its headlights illuminated everything with brutal clarity. And right behind it, a huge, newly dug trench, about 3 meters deep, I estimated, enough space to bury 43 people without leaving a visible trace of the road. "Come on," ordered one of the soldiers, and we walked towards our own grave. I need to go back 6 years in time. You need to understand how we got to that hole in the ground, how a group of ordinary people decided to risk everything for something invisible, intangible, but more real than anything we had ever touched. I didn't grow up believing in God. I grew up in a house where the only faith allowed was in the party. My father worked inspecting factories. My mother taught young children. Honest, hard-working people who never questioned the system because the system provided stability. And in China, stability is worth more than anything else. My life changed in the last place I would have imagined, a cancer hospital in Shanghai. It was 2017, a hellish summer with 40-degree temperatures that felt like the ground was melting. My wife, Lynn, had just received the diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors said 3 months. I was 31 years old and watching my childhood friend, the mother of my daughter, the person who gave meaning to my life, wither away before my eyes. It was in the waiting room that I met Pastor Wu. Even though it's dangerous to use that title around here, he carried it with quiet dignity. He didn't try to convert me. He didn't shove pamphlets into my hand. He simply sat beside me while I fell apart. And when I finally managed to say something, he said words that have never left my mind. This pain you're feeling is real, but there is a God who cries with you, not one who just watches from above without caring. Lynn lived 8 months longer than the doctors had given her. It wasn't the instant cure you hear about in some testimonies. It was something different, deeper. It was peace in the midst of chaos. She gave her life to Christ 2 weeks before she passed away, and the change in her was so visible that even the nurses commented on it. The woman who screamed in pain at night began to softly sing hymns. The one who cursed her fate began to pray for other patients. When she closed her eyes for the last time, her last words were, "Gay, promise me one thing. Look for the others. Don't be alone in this." I kept my promise. Pastor Wu connected me with a network of hidden churches operating in Wenzhou. The city was known as the Jerusalem of China because of the large number of Christians it had. But precisely because of this, it was a constant target of persecution. The official churches, registered and controlled by the government, preached a watered-down gospel where Christ shared space with the president. House churches like ours preached that Christ was the only Lord, and that made us criminals. Our study group started small, 7 people in my apartment. We prayed quietly, with music playing to drown out the chanting. The neighbors didn't suspect a thing, and my co-workers knew nothing. Even my daughter May, who was 9 at the time, learned to make excuses when asked what we did on Sunday nights. "We watched a movie as a family," she'd say. But the group kept growing, from 7 to 15, then 25. By 2020, we were more than 40 people eager to worship freely, study the Bible without censorship, and sing without fear of being overheard through the wall. Each new person brought their own story of despair and encounter with the divine. Brother Liu had been addicted to opium. He lived on the streets of Hangzhou until an elderly believer gave him food and hope. Sister Chang had lost 3 children during the Great Leap Forward famine. It was in Christ that she found the only comfort that government promises never could provide. Young David, only 18 years old, had tried to take his own life twice because of the insane pressure of his studies. It was then that he discovered that his worth was not in his test scores. We became a family, the only family where we could take off our masks and be completely honest about our fears, our flaws, our doubts. The system had taught us our whole lives to hide who we really were. Christ was teaching us the opposite. Signs of danger came gradually, like cracks in a dam before everything collapses. First was Sister Chen, arrested for posting Bible verses on social media. 15 days in detention. When she returned, she was different. That lost look, refusing to talk about what she had seen inside that cell. Then, Brother Wang disappeared for 3 weeks. When he reappeared, he had burn marks on his arms and a very clear message. He had signed papers renouncing his faith. It was that or never see his elderly parents again. Pastor Wu gathered us together one evening in February 2023, a little over a month before that night. He seemed to have aged 10 years in 6 months. "Brothers," he said in a heavy voice, "the pressure is mounting. The authorities have lists with our names, they have photos, they have our addresses. If you decide to continue, know that the price could be very high." No one left. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was true faith, probably it was a bit of both. But there, in that moment, the 43 of us decided that a God who had died for us deserved that we risk something in return. We didn't know that this something would literally be everything. The night of March 11th began like any other. We arrived in small groups, 15 minutes apart, using different routes. The abandoned factory was located in a decaying industrial area where the only witnesses were stray dogs and fat rats rummaging through the garbage. The perfect place to go unnoticed, or so we thought. The service that night was especially powerful. Brother Liu preached from the book of Daniel, chapter 3, the story of the 3 young men thrown into the furnace. "God can deliver us," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "but even if he doesn't, we will not bow down to other gods." The prophetic irony of those words haunts me to this day. We sang Amazing Grace in whispers, tears streaming down the faces of people the world called criminals, but heaven called children. May, my daughter, had brought her violin and played the prelude so beautifully that even the rats seemed to stop and listen. In that damp, dark basement, we experienced something no palace could buy, the genuine presence of God. That's when we heard the engines. The rest you already know. The door being broken down, the soldiers coming down, the flashlights blinding us. But there's one thing I haven't told you yet. After announcing our death sentence, the officer said one more thing. "You are a cancer." He spat the words out as if they were poison. Western infiltrators are poisoning the minds of patriotic citizens. The state cannot allow them to spread this foreign superstition. The Provincial Security Committee has determined that you represent a red-level threat. Red-level threat. In their bureaucracy, that meant one thing: immediate elimination, without due process, without trial. We weren't the first, and we wouldn't be the last. They lined us up. The plastic cable ties cut off the circulation to my wrists. I could feel the blood throbbing in my fingers, each pulse reminding me that, for now, I was still alive. The walk to that hole was surreal. My legs moved automatically, one foot in front of the other, while my mind screamed that this couldn't be really happening. We were in 21st century China, not Nazi Germany, not Pol Pot's Cambodia. We had cell phones, bullet trains, skyscrapers. How could all this modernity coexist with such primitive barbarity? But the yellow excavator in front of me was real. The hole was real. The 18 soldiers with Type 95 rifle were terrifyingly real. The machine operator was a big guy, about 45 years old, with a dragon tattoo on his forearm. He smoked with a studied indifference, as if burying people alive were as common as paving roads. Probably it was. There had probably been other red-level threat groups before us, now fertilizing some isolated field. "Engineer Zhao," the officer called, pointing to the tattooed man, "proceed to the final phase." Engineer Zhao nodded, stubbed out his cigarette with his boot, and climbed into the excavator cab. The diesel engine roared, a guttural sound that made the ground tremble beneath our feet. Black smoke billowed from the exhaust, carrying that smell of burnt fuel that mingled with our panicked sweat. They pushed us to the edge of the crater. From above, it seemed even deeper, about 3 meters down to the bottom of wet earth that smelled of worms and decay. The walls were straight, cut with mechanical precision. There was no way to climb back up. "Jump!" ordered a young soldier. He couldn't have been more than 22 years old. He avoided looking at us. Moral cowardice disguised as obedience to orders. Brother Liu was the first. He fell with a dull thud, rolled onto his shoulder, and knelt, looking up. "Heavenly Father," he began to pray aloud, defiantly. "See what men do in the darkness." "Silence!" shouted the officer. But Brother Liu did not stop. His voice came out firm and clear, reciting Psalm 91. "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." One by one, the 43 of us jumped into our graves. When it was May's turn, she was trembling so much she could barely stand. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm scared." I was too, a fear so physical that I could taste bitter metal in my mouth. But I told her the only truth that mattered at that moment. Jesus is down here with us. See, she jumped, clinging to those words as if they were a rope. When the last brother hit the bottom of the ditch, we were all crammed together like sardines in a can, our bodies pressed against each other. Our human warmth contrasted sharply with the icy earth that would soon cover us. I could smell May's shampoo mixed with Brother Liu's sweat, and Sister Chang's cheap perfume, scents of life about to be buried. Up above, silhouetted against the starry sky, the officer signaled. Engineer Zhao engaged first gear. The excavator moved toward the pile of loose earth accumulated beside the hole. The robotic arm descended, the steel jaws closing to grasp half a ton of earth. And with a smooth movement, the first load began to descend toward us. The first shovelful of dirt fell on our heads at 10:17 p.m. I know the exact time because I instinctively looked at the clock, as if time still mattered. as if marking the moment of our death could give any meaning to it. The impact was gentler than I expected. Damp earth hitting shoulders, heads, faces turned upwards in a last attempt to see the sky. The sound was strangely intimate, a grainy whisper of earth scraping against clothing, skin, hair. Some screamed, others wept. Brother Liu, incredibly, was still praying aloud, his voice vying with the roar of the bulldozer. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. The second load was heavier. Pebbles mixed in with the earth thumped like punches. I heard a muffled cry to my right. A stone had split someone's eyebrow open. Warm blood splattered on my face. May buried her face in my chest, her shoulders shaking with sobs she couldn't hold back. I tried to hug her with my hands tied behind her back, an absurd position that only gave the illusion of protection. The third load began to form a layer on the ground. My feet disappeared under 5 centimeters of earth, then 10, then 15. The weight was beginning to press down. It wasn't unbearable yet, but it carried the ominous promise of what was to come. The bulldozer roared again. The robotic arm rose once more with its deadly load. But this time, something inside me snapped in a different way. It wasn't panic, it was clarity. A crystal-clear understanding that these were my last minutes on Earth and that I had to decide how to use them. "Let's sing!" I shouted in a voice that didn't sound like my own. "If we're going to die, let's die praising God." Sister Sang, the woman who had survived the Cultural Revolution, was the first to join. Her voice was hoarse but firm. "Great is your faithfulness, O God, my Father." One by one, the others joined in until 43 voices formed a chorus from the depths of the earth. Up above, the soldiers stopped. The officer raised his hand, signaling for the excavator to halt. I saw them looking down with expressions ranging from confusion to something akin to fear. Because there's something profoundly disturbing about seeing people singing while being buried alive, something that defies all logic, that breaks the expected script of pleading and despair. We didn't beg, we loved it. The earth continued to fall between the verses of the hymn. Now it covered our knees. The weight increased with each passing second, making it difficult to breathe. Some brothers collapsed to the ground, unable to stand any longer under the accumulated pressure. My legs were trembling too, my muscles screaming under unbearable strain. May stopped crying. I don't know if it was shock or faith, but she lifted her 15-year-old face to the sky and joined her soprano voice to our final hymn. Each morning brings new mercy. Great, Lord, is your faithfulness. The fourth load reached our waist. The fifth hit our chest. Breathing became a conscious effort. Each breath required force to expand the ribcage against the increasing resistance. The air itself seemed denser, harder to process. Some people coughed, spitting out dirt that had gotten into their mouths while they sang. The excavator operator, Engineer Zhao, no longer smoked with that same ease. I could see him through the curtain of falling earth, sitting in the cab with both hands gripping the controls, his jaw clenched. Even from a distance, you could sense that something in him was changing. No one had trained him for this, to bury people who sang instead of begging. The sixth burden arrived on our shoulders. The song began to fragment. We no longer had enough breath to sustain the melody. It became broken phrases, loose words thrown to the sky like arrows of despair, and faith intertwined. Jesus, always faithful. With you. I kept my chin up, refusing to look down. If it was going to end, let the last thing I saw be the sky I would soon inhabit. The stars shone with a cruel intensity, thousands of points of light, silent witnesses to our agony. The Big Dipper, Orion, constellations I had learned about as a child, never imagining I would see them for the last time from the depths of my own grave. The seventh charge struck our necks. The primal terror of asphyxiation gripped my nervous system. Every cell in my body screamed against the absurdity of being buried alive. My lungs struggled to expand against the compression. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears, my temples, my throat. The survival instinct colliding with a reality from which there was no escape. May could no longer. Only her eyes were still visible above ground level, two wells of terror staring at me, searching for answers I didn't have. I held her gaze, trying to convey all my love in that visual connection that would soon be severed forever. "Father," I whispered, my lips covered in dust, "if it is your will, deliver us. But if not..." The dirt invaded my mouth before I could finish the sentence. The eighth charge began to engulf our heads. Darkness arrived gradually, not all at once. First, the horizon disappeared. Then the stars faded one by one. Finally, the light from the soldiers' lanterns became just a diffuse glow that barely penetrated a few centimeters of earth above my forehead. My eyes were still open when the earth covered them. It was instinctive, stupid, but I couldn't force myself to close them. I felt the rough grains scratching my cornea, seeping under my eyelids, turning my vision into absolute darkness, punctuated by red spots of pain. The sound became muffled. My brother's screams faded into the distance, as if underwater. The roar of the excavator turned into a dull vibration that I felt more in my skull than heard. My own breathing became deafening. Each desperate breath sounded like a gale in a cave. I tried to draw air, but only dust entered my nostril. I coughed violently, expelling particles, but inhaling even more in the process. The reflex almost made me vomit, which would have been fatal. I forced my throat shut, my lungs searching for any air pocket trapped between the grains around me. There weren't any. The pressure in my ears increased. I felt the earth compacting, becoming denser with each passing second. My body was being mummified alive, preserved in an earthen womb that rejected any attempt at movement. I tried to move my fingers. They didn't respond. I tried to tilt my head. Impossible. I was frozen in an upright position, a statue of flesh waiting to become a skeleton. The seconds dragged on like hours. My mind started playing tricks on me. I saw flashes of light where there shouldn't have been any. I heard voices where there was only suffocating silence. Lin, my deceased wife, calling me from somewhere far away. Pastor Wu reciting verses I had never memorized. My mother singing the lullaby from my childhood. Hypoxia, lack of oxygen. My brain is starting to shut down. I thought of May, buried inches from me but completely unreachable. Had she already lost consciousness? Was she suffering? Or had she found that peace, they say, comes before the end? The idea of my daughter dying, terrified, alone in the dark, was more unbearable than my own death. God, I prayed silently, because my mouth no longer functioned. If you exist, if anything we believe in is real, please, not for me, but for her, for all who trusted in you. The ninth load fell. I felt the distant impact like a muffled earthquake. The weight on my body increased to almost unbearable levels. Something in my chest snapped, probably a rib breaking. The pain was strangely distant, as if it were happening to someone else. My heart started beating irregularly. Arrhythmia, another sign that the systems were failing. Boom, boom, long pause, boom, even longer pause, boom, 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 fast. My body fighting a losing battle against inevitable shutdown. The 10th charge sealed the tomb. All sound from the outside world vanished. Only the deepest silence I had ever experienced remained. Not even an underground cave could compare. It was the silence of the grave, the silence of non-existence approaching. My lungs made one last desperate attempt to expand. They failed. My diaphragm contracted in a final spasm. The darkness behind my eyelids grew even denser, if that was possible, a blackness that consumed even the memory of light. In that moment of final surrender, as my consciousness began to dissolve like salt in water, something inside me whispered the only prayer I had left. Into your hands, I commit my spirit. And then, in that instant, between life and death, when 43 people had crossed the threshold of human hope, something impossible began to happen. The first sign was a vibration. It didn't come from above, where the excavator continued its macabre work. It came from below, from the depths of the earth itself, a subtle tremor that grew in intensity until it became a violent jolt that shook every particle of earth, keeping me prisoner. For a second I thought, earthquake. China is in a seismic zone, but earthquakes aren't selective. They don't concentrate their force on a specific point in an abandoned industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Wenzhou. The vibration intensified. The earth around me began to move, not falling, but separating, as if invisible hands were breaking it apart, grain by grain. The pressure in my chest lessened enough for my lungs to desperately gasp for air. Air mixed with dust, but air nonetheless. From up there, I heard something I'll never forget. The sound of metal twisting, a high-pitched screech like giant fingernails scraping on a steel slate. The excavator, that 30-ton yellow beast, began to tilt, slowly at first, then with nauseating acceleration. The robotic arm stopped mid-descent, suspended at an impossible angle, defying physics itself. "Shit!" Engineer Zhao yelled from the cabin, his words incoherent, only primal terror. He tried to release the controls. His hands wouldn't respond. He tried to engage the hydraulic brakes, but the system wouldn't obey. The machine had a life of its own now, and that life was being nullified by something greater. The excavator tilted even further, 45 degrees, 50, 60. The tracks on the right side lifted off the ground, suspended in the air as if those 15 tons weighed nothing. The engine roared in protest, the revs climbing uncontrollably, but the movement didn't stop. The soldiers retreated. 18 armed men, trained to fear nothing, stumbled over each other as they ran. 2 dropped their rifle. 1 fell backward, crawling like a terrified crab. The officer with the scar on his face, that man with the icy voice who had ordered our deaths, stood paralyzed, his face as white as paper. The excavator reached 75 degrees. The cabin windows shattered with a sound like breaking glass. Engineer Zhao managed to open the door and threw himself out, rolling on the ground. His dragon tattoo was covered in blood from the cuts. He stood there, staggering, staring at his machine as if it were a creature that had betrayed him. And then the excavator stopped, not gradually, not with a final jolt. It simply froze in an impossible position, leaning like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, but made of steel, defying gravity and reason. The engine kept running, but without any power, humming uselessly. The mechanical arm hung inert, its steel jaws open, dumping the earth that would never completely bury us. The silence that followed was more deafening than any explosion. Underground, I felt the pressure disappear completely. The earth no longer compressed. It was actively moving, creating space where none should exist. My face was the first to be freed. The cool air hit my dust-covered skin. I opened my eyes, blinking to relieve the sting of the encrusted grain, and saw slivers of light filtering in from above. "Breathe!" I shouted in a hoarse voice. "God is giving us air!" I heard sighs from all sides, cries of incredulous relief. One by one, the 43 of us began to emerge from that tomb as if we were seeds planted in winter that inexplicably sprouted in minutes. The earth slid from our bodies with supernatural ease as if it refused to hold us back. Brother Liu was the first to emerge completely. His face was a mask of mud, but his eyes glistened with tears that formed clean furrows in his soiled cheeks. "Praise the Lord!" he exclaimed, his voice choked with emotion. "The God of Daniel has not changed." Sister Shang emerged crying and laughing at the same time, a mixture of hysteria and gratitude. Young David, 18, vomited dirt for a few seconds before managing to breathe fresh air. One after another, incredibly alive, acutely conscious, we emerged from what should have been our grave. May came close to me. Her face, that terrified face I had seen in the last visible moment, now reflected pure astonishment. "Dad," she whispered. I felt hands lifting me up, but there was no one there. I felt that way too. Up above, the soldiers retreated further and further. 3 fled, running straight to the military trucks. Those who remained made the sign of the cross, a curious gesture, considering that the party forbids all religion. But primal terror prevails over indoctrination. When you see the impossible with your own eyes, the most ancestral instincts resurface. Engineer Zhao, the man with the dragon tattoo who operated our killing machine, was on his knees. His hands trembled as he looked alternately at the frozen excavator and at us emerging from the earth. His mouth opened and closed silent, a fish out of water. Then he spoke, and his question changed everything that came after. "Who is your God?" The voice was almost inaudible, faltering with each syllable. Brother Liu, covered in dirt, but more alive than ever, replied with an authority that didn't come from himself. "His name is Jesus Christ, the one who died and rose again, the one who has power over life and death, the one you just saw take control of your machine with a simple thought." The officer with the scar tried to regain control of the situation. This is a mechanical failure, a coincidence." But his voice betrayed the doubt. No one believed those words, not even himself. The excavator, as if responding to his skepticism, emitted a prolonged metallic groan, like a wounded creature. Then, with deliberate slowness, it tilted even further, 90 degrees, completely to the side. The 30 tons of steel simply gave way, lying on the ground like a domesticated animal. The mechanical arm, the very arm that sealed our fate, broke at the central joint, not with explosive violence, but with an almost gentle surrender. The two sections separated and fell, raising a cloud of dust, but injuring no one. The machine was dead, and we were alive. Engineer Zhao stood up slowly and walked over. He walked toward the ditch, where the 43 of us had just come from, and knelt at the edge. Tears streamed down his face, leaving clean trail in the dust. "I've been operating excavator for 23 years, he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I've moved mountains, demolished buildings, dug 1,000 holes. But never, ever has a machine refused to obey like this, as if it had a conscience of its own, as if it knew what it was doing was wrong." "It wasn't the machine," Brother Liu said softly. "It was the one who created iron, fire, and everything else that exists. The one who can shut the mouths of lions, seal furnaces, and part seas. The one who decided that tonight would not be our end." Several soldiers approached cautiously. They no longer pointed their weapons. They no longer followed orders. They were just men confronted with something that training manuals didn't teach. A young corporal, no more than 25 years old, asked, "How can we get to know this God?" And there, amidst that overturned earth, the shattered metal, and the shattered expectation, something completely unexpected began. Brother Liu, still with his hands tied behind his back, began to preach, not a planned sermon, but words that sprang from a place deeper than academic theology, words born from the experience of having been literally snatched from the clutches of death. "Christ died for you too," he said, looking at the soldiers. "You who were going to bury us, you who were just following orders. He died for those who hammer the nails, not just for the crucified. His love is as impossible as what you have just witnessed, and the door is still open." 3 soldiers knelt right there, then 5, then 8. Engineer Zhao was the first to pray aloud, the confession escaping in sobs from a heart that had seen too much and finally broken. The officer with the scar watched from a distance, tense, refusing to move, but even he didn't order them to stop. How could he? With what authority could he prevent something that clearly came from a higher authority? The night ran its course. The stars continued to shine, witnesses that now seemed less cruel and more like a reminder that there are realities beyond those we can touch. The 43 believers, dirty, bruised, with broken ribs and damaged lungs, embraced each other. They wept, they worshiped, because we had seen what Job could only imagine, that there is an advocate in heaven who fights earthly battles, that prayers whispered under tons of earth reach divine ears with the clarity of bells, that when the power of hell is activated, the power of heaven responds with an authority that shatters metal and moves the earth. We weren't released to return to our normal lives. The persecution would continue. Some of us would face imprisonment later. Others would flee to distant countries. But that night, at that exact moment, we knew with unwavering certainty that we served a God who does not abandon his own, not even in the grave, especially not in the grave. Engineer Zhao's conversion was the first of many dominoes to fall that night. His confession was brutally honest. Between sobs that shook his heavy body, he told us that it wasn't the first time he had buried people alive. "I operate machinery in social cleansing projects." That was the government's euphemistic term, in 3 different provinces. Tibetans resisting forced removal, Uyghurs accused of extremism, Falun Gong practitioners, and now you, the underground Christians. I buried 117 people in 4 years, he confessed, his voice breaking. Every night their faces visited. Every night I drank myself to death, just so I wouldn't see them. And tonight, when my machine refused to finish the job, he covered his face with trembling hand. I knew my judgment had finally come, that some higher power had said, enough. Brother Liu ripped the plastic cable ties off his own wrists, an act of grace that made the engineer cry even more. It's not a judgment, Liu said gently. It's an invitation. Christ is calling you home. The conversion wasn't instantaneous, though the emotional collapse seemed to have been. Zhao asked questions for nearly an hour, questions that revealed a deep spiritual hunger, but also a skepticism sharpened by decades of official materialism. How do I know what I saw was real? How do I know it wasn't, I don't know, a release of underground gas that tilted the machine? Sister Shang, that elderly survivor of the Cultural Revolution, responded with the wisdom of 9 decades of life. Son, when you're 82 years old and have seen everything this world can show you, you develop a sense of what comes from above and what comes from below. What you witnessed wasn't physical. It was intervention. But it was May, my 15-year-old daughter, who gave the testimony that finally broke through Zhao's defenses. With dirt still in her hair and her voice trembling, but not broken, she told about her mother. My mother died of cancer when I was 9 years old, she began. The doctors gave her 3 months. She lived 8. And in those extra 5 months, she talked to us about heaven. She talked about Jesus. She said that the impossible was God's specialty. She wiped away her tears, leaving clean furrows in the mud on her cheeks. Tonight I was going to die beside my father, buried as my mother was buried. But my mother is with Jesus, and Jesus decided it wasn't my time yet. He used you, Engineer Zhao, to show that even killing machines can be stopped when he says, stop. Zhao wept like a child, and when he finally prayed, it was with that simplicity of heart that puts all complex religions to shame. Jesus, if you are real, if you can forgive the unforgivable, then I need you, because I am the most broken man here. 5 more soldiers approached in the following 30 minutes, each with their own story of doubt, fear, and searching. The 25-year-old corporal's name was Chen. He had grown up in a state orphanage after his parents died in a mining accident. I never believed in anything, he admitted. What for? Life was just survival. But tonight, I saw survival become something more. I saw life where there shouldn't be life. And I want that. I want that kind of hope. Another soldier, surnamed Wang, confessed that he planned to desert the army the following week. I'm tired of orders that destroy instead of build. Tired of silent missions that stain my hands. Tonight I was going to stain my hands with 43 more lives. But someone stopped me, and I think that was the last chance they gave me before I was completely lost. Not everyone converted. The officer with the scar on his face remained impassive. When Brother Liu tried to talk to him, the man spat at his feet. This is a hoax, a conspiracy. You sabotaged the machine somehow, and when the committee finds out, the consequences will be worse than death. But his voice lacked conviction, and crucially, he didn't try to stop us when we started to leave, because that was the strangest part of all. We simply left. It was 12:40 a.m., after almost 3 hours in that cursed place that had become holy ground. Brother Liu made the decision. Brothers, heaven has granted us a miracle, but it hasn't relieved us of responsibility. We need to leave now, before reinforcements arrive. We split into small groups, families together, singles with elderly people. Zhao, the engineer who had become a fugitive, insisted on taking us in military trucks to the nearest train station. It's the least I can do, he said. And besides, if I get arrested tomorrow, at least I'll have done one good thing with these hands. The journey was surreal. 43 mud-covered fugitives traveling in government vehicles, escorted by newly converted soldiers. The irony was not lost on anyone. At Wenzhou South Station, we said goodbye, knowing we would probably never see each other again as a complete group. China is vast. The persecution is systematic. Underground churches operate in cells to survive. If one falls, the others continue. Brother Liu blessed us one by one. When he reached May and me, he placed his hands on our heads and prayed with a choked voice. Father, these two have seen your power in ways that few see. Use them, send them, so that every time they tell this story, someone will find hope in their own despair. Zhao embraced us before leaving. The man who operated our killing machine was now a brother in Christ. I'll look for Lu in Shenzhen, he promised. They say there's an underground network there that can hide converts like me. But first I need to go back. I need to face what I did before tonight. I need to confess. I warned him that confessing would likely mean prison. He smiled sadly. Brother Wei, I was already in prison, one without bars or guards, but prison nonetheless. Tonight, I found freedom. If I need to go to a physical cell to maintain this spiritual freedom, it's a trade I accept. I never saw Zhao again. Months later, I heard rumors that he had confessed his crimes to higher authorities, that he had been sentenced to 15 years, that he was evangelizing in prison, that he had baptized 30 inmates in a laundry tub. I can't confirm any of this, but I want to believe it's true. I want to believe that the man who helped bury 117 people is now helping to resurrect hundreds of others. May and I took an overnight train to Shanghai. From there, with the help of a network of underground churches that functions as a modern escape railway, we managed to cross over to Hong Kong before the window of freedom closed completely. In Hong Kong, Western missionaries connected us to a refugee program that would eventually lead us to South Korea. The journey lasted 8 months. 8 months living in the shadow, sleeping on the floors of strangers' apartments who shared our faith, eating what others sacrificed from their own tables. Every news story from China was a stab in the back. Brother Liu arrested in Shenzhen, Sister Shang dying in prison at 83, young David missing, whereabouts unknown. 43 people went into that hole. 43 came out alive, but only 17 managed to escape China. The others faced consequences I prefer not to detail. Suffice it to say that the miracle of that night was not a promise that we would never suffer again. It was a reminder that, even in suffering, we are not alone. We arrived in Seoul in November 2023. The city was a whirlwind of religious freedom. Churches with colorful signs on every corner. Believers practicing their faith without fear of having their doors broken down. May cried the first time we went into a public church. "Dad," she whispered, "it's real. They really can sing that loud." Gradually, we integrated into a community of North Korean and Chinese refugees, each with invisible scars, each with stories that seemed too extreme to be true, but which we knew to be as real as our own testimony. We formed a new Bible study group, this time not out of a need to hide, but out of a need to heal together. May began having nightmares. She would wake up screaming, convinced that the earth was falling on her face. Therapy helped. Prayer helped even more. Slowly, with the patience of a community that understood trauma, my daughter began to laugh again, to dream again, to live without constantly looking over her shoulder. I fought differently. Survivor's guilt gnawed at me. Why did I escape when Brother Liu was captured? Why was May safe when Sister Chang's daughter was orphaned? Easy answers didn't satisfy me. God has a plan for you. It seemed empty when I thought about those who were left behind. It was Pastor Kim, leader of a refugee church in Seoul, who finally helped me process everything. "Gay," he told me one rainy afternoon, "the miracle wasn't just saving you, it was creating witnesses. Someone needs to tell the story. Someone needs to remember what God did that night. That's your calling now. Don't waste the life that was given back to you feeling guilty for having it." So I started speaking, first in small groups, then in churches, finally at conferences. The testimony resonated because it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't a spiritual metaphor or a well-intentioned parable. It was the verifiable account of 43 people buried alive, who emerged because a 30-ton machine simply refused to continue. The reactions were varied. Some cried, others questioned the detail, seeking a natural explanation that would preserve their vision of an ordered world. Some accused me of exaggeration or pure fiction. I wasn't offended. I would have been skeptical too if I hadn't experienced it firsthand. But what impacted me most were the people who came to me afterward with their own battles. The woman with terminal cancer seeking hope, the man on the verge of financial ruin, the couple whose marriage was hanging by a thread, all wanting to know if the God who stopped the bulldozer could stop their own monster. And here is the truth I learned. God doesn't promise to stop all the bulldozers. He doesn't promise to deliver us from every grave. Lynn, my wife, died despite our prayers. Brother Liu was imprisoned despite the miracle. Life after the miracle still includes pain. So what does the miracle of Wenzhou mean? It means that God can, that when He decides to intervene, no earthly power can resist, that His time is not our time, but His eyes are always upon us, that even when the earth closes in on our heads, literally or metaphorically, He is there, present, powerful, able to transform a grave into a testament. Your excavator might not be made of yellow steel. It could be a medical diagnosis that sounds like a death sentence. It could be debt piling up like dirt on your chest. It could be a toxic relationship suffocating you. It could be depression stealing your breath, addiction destroying your will, or trauma paralyzing you in darkness. I don't promise that God will stop your bulldozer, but I promise that He is down there with you. And if you choose to trust Him, even in the darkness, you will find His presence more real than your panic. May is 17 years old now. She studies violin at a conservatory in Seoul. Her dream is to return to China someday, when it is safe, and play music that speaks of hope in places where hope has been forbidden. Father, she tells me, that night God saved my body. But every day since then, He has saved my soul, teaching me that life is not the absence of graves, but the presence of the one who holds the keys to every grave. The wisdom of a 17-year-old that sounds like that of an 80-year-old. I received a letter 6 months ago, no return address, delivered through a complex network of contacts. Inside, a single sentence in Mandarin. Zhao continues preaching. 20 converts last month. The bulldozer couldn't bury him. Neither could the prison. I cried tears of joy. Because if Zhao can preach from a cell, I can preach from the safety of soul. If he can plant seeds in concrete, I can plant seeds in fertile soil. The legacy of that night is not just that we survived, it's that the story survives. And every time it's told, someone finds the courage to believe that the impossible remains possible. I learned that faith is not the absence of doubt. It is the decision to act despite it. That night in Wenzhou, I had all the doubts. I doubted that God would save us. I doubted that a miracle was possible. I doubted until the very last second when I felt the earth move in an impossible way. But my doubt didn't prevent the miracle. The faith of 43 people worshiping at the tomb was enough. Because when a community cries out in unison, heaven answers. Your personal battle may seem just as impossible as the one we face, perhaps even more so. Because at least our bulldozer was visible, our enemy identifiable. Their internal bulldozers are more insidious. You can't touch them, you can't aim at them, but they bury you all the same. Depression is an excavator that slowly digs shovel after shovel of negative thoughts that accumulate until you can no longer see the light. Anxiety is an excavator that never stops, always threatening with the next load of worry. Addiction is an excavator operated by your own hand, digging a grave from which you swear you will never escape. But I tell you this with the authority of someone who has been underground. God can stop any bulldozer. He doesn't always do it spectacularly. He doesn't always send earthquakes that make metal tremble. Sometimes His intervention is subtle. A therapist who says exactly the right word. A friend who calls just when you are about to give up. A verse that leaps off the page as if it were written specifically for you today. Sometimes the miracle isn't being raised from the grave, but discovering that He is down there with you, breathing borrowed air, waiting for the dawn to come. Let me be direct. If you're listening to this story and something inside you is reacting, it's not a coincidence. You didn't stumble upon this testimony through some random algorithm. There is a God who orchestrates impossible encounters because He has a specific message for you. The message is this: you're not that deep. You're not that buried. You're not so lost that you can't be found. The same God who stopped the bulldozer in Wenzhou can stop your fall. The same power that split the earth can break the chains that bind you. But you need to ask. You need to cry out, even if it's a muffled whisper beneath the earth of your despair. He hears. Now, I know some of you are listening to this and thinking, I've already prayed. I've already asked for help. God hasn't answered. I understand. Lynn, my wife, prayed for healing. She wasn't healed in this land. Brother Lou prayed for protection, yet he was imprisoned. The Christian life isn't an insurance policy against suffering, but it is a promise of companionship in suffering. It's a guarantee that the end of this story isn't a grave. It's an invitation to life that begins now and continues beyond any bulldozer that tries to stop us. If you need specific prayer, don't keep it to yourself. Share your struggle. This community isn't just here to hear testimony, but to become one, to be a network of faith that sustains when individual strength fails. Finally, if this testimony moved you, challenged you, or gave you even a glimmer of hope, share it. Because someone in your life is buried alive right now and needs to know that the bulldozer can be stopped. Heavenly Father, for all those who are hearing these words now, those who are buried in depression, those who are being crushed by debt, those who are suffocating in toxic relationships, those who feel the earth closing in on them with no escape, stop your bulldozer, not because they are perfect, not because they deserve it, but because you are a God of mercy who specializes in the impossible. May they feel your presence beneath the earth with them. May they see your power destroy machines that seemed invincible. May they experience the liberation that only you can give. In the name of Jesus, he who came out of his own tomb and has authority over all of us. Amen. 2 years have passed since that night. My life will never be the same again. I live with the constant awareness that each day is a borrowed gift, time stolen from a grave that had already been dug. I use this time trying to fulfill what I believe to be the purpose of the miracle, to testify that God is still at work, that the days of miracles did not end in the apostolic era, that the same power that raised Christ from the dead is available to us today. I don't know how many of the 43 are still alive. I don't know if we'll ever be able to gather again as a complete church, but I know that wherever we are, everyone tells the same story. And every time it's told, someone decides to believe that their bulldozer too can be stopped. Share your testimony of how God has worked in your life, because this isn't just my testimony, it's our testimony. The testimony of all of us who have seen the impossible become possible when heaven decides to intervene. May God bless you. May He keep you in the palm of His hand. And when your bulldozer advances, may you encounter a being more powerful who already prevents the metal from hitting you. In His hands we are safe, even underground.